right, good morning. So thank you all for coming out this early on a Saturday morning to start off Skeptics of Oz. Our first speaker is going to be Caleb Lack from the University of Central Oklahoma. Dr. Lack is a clinical psychologist and professor at the University of Central Oklahoma and has won numerous awards for his teaching and research. He's the author of over 36 scientific articles and books, and is on the board of review for several journals. Presents nationally and internationally on anxiety disorders and obsessive compulsive disorder. On the skeptical side of his day job, he teaches undergraduate and graduate courses on critical thinking, science, and pseudoscience. These recently culminated in an online text, Science, Pseudoscience, and Critical Thinking, as well as a series of documentaries on pseudoscience and superstition in Oklahoma. He writes the Great Plains Skeptic column on the Skeptic Inc. network, as well as presenting about skepticism and critical thinking. Dr. Lack is also the founding advisor of the UCO Skeptics, a campus group dedicated to the application and promotion of reason and critical thinking and scientific skepticism in all areas of life, a member of the Secular Therapy Project, and a contributor to Michael Shermer's Skepticism 101 project. Go, Freddie.
I apologize for the timbre of my voice. I seem to have talked too much this week. So hopefully we'll be able to get through this and I won't sound too much like Barry White. But if I do, then that just prepares you for Dr. Daryl Ray's presentation on sex later. So hopefully that'll just kind of set the tone a little bit. I'll be okay. Like I said, I'm a clinical psychologist and a professor, and one of the things that I greatly stress when I teach courses as well as when I just give lectures are these critical thinking skills. So we're going to do just sort of a brief refresher on these so that everybody's on the same page for the rest of the convention. Because I'm a professor, I like to do things like ask you questions and make you think. And so I've got 3 questions up here that I want you all to answer. You don't have to like write them down and pass them in the middle or anything, but I want you to answer them to yourself, and I want you to tell me, is this true or is this false? Most people only use about 10% of their brain. Just keep it to yourself. And think, true or false? True or false? Okay, number 2, if you're unsure of your answer while taking a test, it's best to stick with your initial answer. True or false? Which one is it? And then 3rd, people tend to be romantically attracted to individuals who are opposite to them in personality and attitude. So opposites attract, right? Opposites attract. So we've got these 3 questions, true or false, right? I'm not trying to be tricky here, right? I'm not giving you multiple choice or anything, or essay, just true or false. So how many of you guys have heard this before, that people only use 10% of their brain? Okay. How many of you have heard that you should stick to your initial answer when you're taking a test, right? Don't go back and change it. How many of you guys have heard of this one? The opposites attract. Right? It's the basis for, I think, 90% of romantic comedies, right? Now, what's interesting about all these is that they're blatantly false. Completely, 100% false. Now, you may say to yourself, wait a minute, I've talked to a lot of people who seem to be using only about 10%. and intellectually, perhaps that's true, but in terms of our uses of the brain, we actually use all of our brain. If we didn't, we wouldn't have it. It's an enormous resource hog in terms of glucose. This 10% number comes from a misinterpretation in the Ladies' Home Journal, that bastion of scientific knowledge, from the 1930s, when they reported on a study, one of the earliest studies that had used EEG, where the guy had said that people only use about 25% of their brain. Now, obviously, that's not even right. We use 100% of it. We don't use 100% of it all the time. Different areas of our brain are specialized for different kinds of tasks. But we certainly don't just use 10%. But you see this all the time, right? You see it in movies, Limitless that came out a while ago, the X-Men movies that came out about a decade ago. They talked about this. That's why Professor X had all those cool powers. He used like 15% of his brain, right? And Einstein, oh, he used 14% of his brain. Look how smart he was. Completely nonsensical. How many of you guys heard this one, right? Stick with your initial answer. Who told you that? Tell me. Teachers, right? College instructors?
Alex Trebek.
Alex Trebek, again, noted Canadian scientist. Purveyor of excellent mustachery, yes. but not so much a scientist. This is false, all right? So you've been lied to by your teachers, right? Now, they're not purposefully doing it to screw your test scores up or anything, but they just don't know. They don't know any better. But it's true. What you see is that people tend to score higher if they go back and change an answer that they're uncertain of to something else. And usually that's because there's something else in the test that you're exposed to that triggers a memory trace that then allows you to more accurately answer that question. And then finally, opposites attract, right? We've all seen this. And it's true that opposites attract, but it's only if they're magnets. What we know from large-scale research is that the more similar you are in attitudes and personality to your potential spouse or mate, the more likely you are to have a satisfying relationship with them. Right? So these are all false, but the majority of the American public believes these. I'm not going to call you guys out and see which one of you believes which one of these, but because we're different, right? But the majority of the American public believes all of these are true. So why? Right? Why do we believe these things? Well, because a lot of them seem sort of commonsensical, right? I'm going to put up some other common sense sayings, and I want you to just throw a hand up if you're familiar with this saying, okay? Look before you leap. Yeah, we've all heard that one, right? Birds of a feather flock together, right? So people who are similar come together. Better safe than sorry. All right, but the bigger the better. We hear this a lot in Oklahoma because it's the state motto of Texas, of course. It's not a good motto, it turns out. Actions speak louder than words. Right? You're never too old to learn. Some of you are like, yeah, I hope. Right? I'm holding on. I'm holding on to that one being true. So we all hear these commonsensical sayings, right? He who hesitates is lost. You've heard that one, right? So you got to jump in, right? You can't just hold back. Opposites attract, again. We've heard that. Nothing ventured, nothing gained, right? What about good things come in small packages? Right? Some of you are, again, hoping that one's true too, right? So lots of hope here. The pen is mightier than the sword. Not the penis mightier, that's Daryl here. The pen is mightier than the sword. And you can't teach an old dog new tricks. Now these are all commonsensical sayings that we've been exposed to our entire life. What's the problem with these though? Well, it turns out these are all opposite, right? These are directly contradictory sayings. So they can't both be true. Well, look before you leap, but he who hesitates is lost. What? No. The bigger the better, but good things come in small packages. We have to figure out, wait, which one of these is actually accurate? Or in which situations are these accurate? Because they're obviously not all accurate all the time. But you'll see people give the exact same reasoning for using one of these, and they'll turn around and tell you the other one. And so what we have then is common sense is neither very common nor very sensible. And so sometimes common sense can be useful, but other times it's just completely wrong, like opposites attract. Completely wrong. Think about your friends, right? Do you all hang out together because you have nothing in common? I mean, you all came here today because you have nothing in common with each other, right? So you're looking around going, wait, I think I may be in the wrong auditorium, right? No revival is here later. Nope, turns out not so much. So sometimes this common sense that is just completely wrong. Completely wrong. And so what that means then is that our natural intuitive sense of ourselves is often, again, wrong. This is why oftentimes I talk about in a lecture about why you can't trust your brain. Because your belief systems and the way that you take information in is sometimes completely wrong and contradictory to what's actually out there. So we can't always trust our own judgment. We can't always trust the judgment of others. And I'm sure you've run into that before. But you're saying to yourself, wait, I'm a skeptic, right? I'm a skeptic. I know what I can trust and what I can't trust my own self. Much like the skeptical hippo here. Well, the problem is that all of our brains operate in a very, very similar fashion. And just because you are skeptical of one piece of information doesn't mean that you apply that same skepticism to all areas of your life. And so that's what we call naive realism. This seeing is believing fallacy, where I think that the way I'm interpreting the world, the way that I'm perceiving the world, is truly accurate. And it turns out, not so much. Now, sometimes this works fine, right? Sometimes this works fine, and seeing truly is believing. But then look at the people around you right now, and observe how many of them are moving extraordinarily quickly. No, nobody, right? Like everyone's just kind of, it's 9:30 on a Saturday. I didn't really want to listen to this guy anyway. I just had a beard. I'm set up. Well, it turns out we're actually all moving very quickly. And the reason for that is that the Earth is moving around the sun at about 18.5 miles per second. We're hurtling through space on a giant rock, right? At enormous, enormous amounts of speed. But we feel like we're not moving at all. We're in Kansas, which, as I learned from NPR a few years ago, actually is truly flatter than a pancake if a pancake were blown up to the size of Kansas. There was a study on this. I don't know how this guy got any funding, but he actually did like a laser scan of a pancake and extrapolated that to Kansas size. And we're like, oh no, it is flatter than a pancake. I'm not even making that up, I'm serious. The Earth seems flat, right? I'm walking around, it doesn't seem like I'm on a giant ball. But you are. And so sometimes this naive realism just truly falls flat. And so what we have to try and do is we have to try and understand why it is that we fall prey to these problems, these ways of thinking that are not necessarily logical or true. And a lot of this comes down to, it boils down to our biases that we exhibit. And the one that I consider the mother of all biases is what's called the confirmation bias. And this is our tendency to, when we have information that's presented to us, and it confirms our held beliefs, we accept it unquestioningly. We say, oh, that's great information. But then when something does not confirm those beliefs, we say, no, you're terrible information, and I'm going to pick you apart and show you exactly why you were so wrong. And we all do this, and it doesn't matter what your religious persuasion is, what your belief systems are on any sort of skeptical attitude scale. We all do this. If you are a Democrat and you see Republicans do something stupid, you go, exactly, of course, because I'm right in my beliefs that I should be a Democrat. If you're a Republican and you see the Democrats do something stupid, same thing, right? But if you're a Republican and you see a Republican do something stupid, you go, no, not actually a good representation of the party. Okay, we're going to kick them out. They're not our true Republican or a true conservative, right? But we all do this. If you think that psychic powers are baloney, which they are, and someone presents you with evidence showing that they're not, you're going to automatically go, nonsense, bullshit, right? And then someone comes up to you and is like, yeah, this is fake. You go, I know, right? You don't even stop to think. And this is why in science, we have to try and disprove rather than just prove our theories. Because we're really great at finding evidence to support ourselves. But we can't just rely on that in scientific understanding, in scientific data. In other words, in being critical thinkers, we have to try and disprove, not just support our theories. And this confirmation bias feeds into what we call belief perseverance. And this is where we tend to stick to our initial beliefs, even if evidence contradicts them. Has anyone ever experienced this when you're arguing with someone on the internet? Right? And you say, here's the evidence that shows that you're wrong. And you feel very good about yourself, right? You're like, yes, this is going to change that person's life. I am going to be, the Dawkins to them, right? And then they come back, they're like, whatever, 6,000 years old, bitch. And you're like, wait, but I showed you the evidence. They don't care. They don't care, just like you don't care when you're shown something that contradicts something that you deeply believe in. Because this confirmation bias feeds this belief perseverance. And it just continues and maintains that. Now, one of the other things or ways that we can be fooled is through the use of heuristics. And heuristics are these little rules of thumb that we use on a daily basis to basically help conserve cognitive energy. So if I ask you, how do you get from Wichita to Kansas City? You're just going to give me very general directions. Or if I say, how long does it take to get there? You're going to give me a ballpark, right? You're going to say, okay, well, what are you driving? What speeds will you be going? How many times will you stop? And you're just going to be like, oh, it takes X amount of hours. And generally, these work pretty well. But a lot of times what happens is these actually greatly simplify reality as it truly is. And so what we tend to do is we tend to make these oversimplified versions of our world. And we rely on those rather than on truly accurate maps of the world. So another quick quiz for everybody. Let's say you're driving from Reno, Nevada to San Diego, California. Put your PDAs down. Right? Put your iPhones down. No one needs to map it out on Google. But just what compass direction would you take? Reno, Nevada to San Diego, California. Anybody?
Southwest.
I heard a south, I heard a southwest. Southwest, right? No, you're wrong, it turns out. San Diego is actually east of Reno. Now, why did you make that mistake? It's not because you're not terribly familiar with the route from Reno to San Diego. I know you all travel that weekly. It's because you oversimplified where Nevada is in relationship to California. Nevada, well, that's sort of north and east of California. So therefore, San Diego is probably south and west of Reno, because Reno's in Nevada. But again, you oversimplify reality. And we do this all the time. This is one of the reasons why, as scientists like myself, we just get really upset when we convey information to the layperson, and we do so in a very subtle way, and then it gets taken and turned on Fox News as, atheists are smarter than the religious. It's like, no, that's not what I said. I said, here's this massive amount of data, and here's all the subtleties to that. But we like to oversimplify things, right? We like bumper stickers. Right? You don't go around and see bumper stickers that are like several paragraphs long. People are coming up to them, reading them, just stopping at stoplights and coming up out of the car. No, we like 4-word bumper stickers, right? It goes much above that where, no thank you. Or better yet, pictograms, right? It's a Jesus fish. It's a Darwin fish. It's a Jesus fish hunting a Darwin fish. And vice versa, right? It's a Tyrannosaurus eating the Jesus fish. And these little pictograms convey information pretty quickly. But at the same time, again, they oversimplify reality. So some of the common heuristics that we use include things like the representativist bias. This is where we tend to judge categories in a way that is not necessarily representative. So this is the like goes with like. So since we're here on a college campus, let's say that I tell you about a student named Amy. Right? And Amy is of Chinese descent. She's the president of the Asian American Club here on campus. And then I ask you, what's her major? Is she an Asian American Studies major or a business major? Many of you, because of the other characteristics that I listed, would say, well, she's probably an Asian Studies major. And you ignore the base rate of that population. I don't even know if there is an Asian Studies major here on campus. But if there is, I would guarantee it's much smaller than your business major. And so you should rely on statistics, right? In order to say, oh, well, chances are she's a business major because they're a lot more popular. Then there's the availability heuristic. This is the off the top of my head heuristic. This is basically, we think things are likely to occur based on how easily we can remember them. So if I ask you all right now, which is greater, the number of words that start with K, or the number of words that have K as the third letter? You're thinking, right? You're thinking, night, kite. I got all sorts of K words at the beginning. That's easy to come up with, right? Turns out there's an enormous number of K words with K as the third letter rather than the first letter. Lots more. Take, make, for example. Lots and lots more with K as the third letter than as the first letter. But it's easier for you to remember K as the first letter. And so that's this availability heuristic. And so these cognitive biases, these heuristics, a lot of times help to misinform our perception of the world. Many of you have fallen prey, I think, to the hindsight bias. We all have. It's the I knew it all along bias. You have a good friend who breaks up with their partner, and you tell your other friend, right, I knew it all along. I knew they wouldn't last. Well, you probably didn't, though, right? Or otherwise, you might have come out with that information beforehand and saved everybody a lot of trouble. But instead, you overestimate how likely you were to have known something. Think about games, right? Basketball games. Who won last night? KU. Okay, I figured most of you would do that. If we were to ask you 2 days ago, how likely is KU to win their game on Friday night? And then we were to ask you today, how likely did you think it was that KU was going to win their basketball game? Your answer today is going to be higher, I guarantee it. Even if it was 90% 2 days ago, you're going to say 95% today. Because you overestimate your ability to actually predict what is going to happen or the outcomes that you already know. We also tend to have a lot of overconfidence in our ability to make correct predictions. Any of you who travel, as the sign told me in my hotel, 15 minutes down the road to the casino, for example, they do a little gambling on the ponies, or you bet on sports outcomes. We tend not to say, I'm really terrible at this, but I'm just going to put my money in. Okay. I like losing my money. No, you say, well, I think I know what's going to happen. I'm going to put some money on there. And so it turns out we're just really having a lot of false confidence in our conclusions because of these biases, because of these heuristics. And so, in turn, what we have to do is we have to get away from this mode of thinking, right? If it seems true to me, it probably is. As humans, this is kind of our default mode of thinking. And you guys have already broken away from some of these, right? In terms of things like supernatural belief systems. But that doesn't mean that you then magically become a critical thinker in all areas of your life. So, adopting this sort of critical mindset, becoming a scientific skeptic, is getting rid of this way of thinking. And instead, it's not relying on opinions. It's not finding out, most people hold this opinion, so it's true. Instead, it's finding out what explanations are best fitting the data. It's finding out what does the world actually look like when I remove these biases, when I remove these things that make me think things are true when it turns out they're not. Because not all opinions are equal and valid. I was interviewed for a documentary this last week about psychics, and they come in and they tell me that, we're just presenting both sides of the story. And I'm sure you guys are all aware, right off the bat, that's a problem, right? Because there are some explanations that are better than others. Oh, I think I really have psychic powers. Oh, I really think you're relying on cold reading and the gullibility of others to prey on them. One of those is better supported by the data. I can do mediumship pretty darn well. But it's not because I have psychic powers, it's because I know how to cold read. So some explanations are better than others. This false equivalence that we see so often in the media and the world around us is ridiculous. Because some things are true. We shouldn't teach the controversy, right? Unless we include our noodly master, the flying spaghetti monster. Because that'd just be funny. So sometimes, again, common sense is right. I don't want everybody to go out of here thinking, oh my God, I can never trust anything that I think again. So, turns out it's right about a number of things. One of my favorites is judging trustworthiness. Humans are excellent at making snap decisions of trustworthiness that are very accurate. Within 5 seconds of looking at a video of someone, for example, and then rating their trustworthiness. So sometimes common sense is right, but again, sometimes it's completely wrong. And so what it should do is it should serve as a hypothesis generator. I think this is true. Now, let me test it out, right? Let me subject it to, it turns out, these critical thinking methods that then allow us to become a better decision maker. Because sometimes I can trust my common sense and sometimes I can't, but I need to know which is which. So, what I encourage everyone to do is to think like a scientist. And that doesn't mean, just thinking about Bunsen burners and statistics all day. That means thinking about, or striving to think scientifically, trying to minimize your thinking errors, your biases, the heuristics you rely on. And so you guys are taking that step. You're becoming aware of these biases, right? You're learning about these. And then the second step you have to take is you have to use the tools of critical thinking to overcome those biases. And luckily for you, I'm going to talk about what those are. Because critical thinking is it's a set of skills, right? It's a set of skills that allow you to then make better decisions about the data in the world because you're less prone to biases. And so basically, thinking critically is a way to avoid being fooled by our own brain. And so this makes us much better decision makers overall. Much better decision makers. So, our first principle of critical thinking is one that many of you are no doubt familiar with. This is the extraordinary claims require extraordinary evidence. So, the more a claim contradicts what we actually know about the world, how the world works, the more substantial the evidence it takes to show that it is actually accurate. So if, for example, I was late today, let's say I wasn't, but let's say that I was, and I came in and I've got like hair on me, just blood and viscera everywhere, and I come in and I just go, holy shit, you're not gonna believe what just happened. Come look at my trunk. And you come outside and you're like, oh my God, what happened? This is terrible. Are you okay? And I say, yeah, but it was really crazy. I ran over a Sasquatch on the way to the conference this morning. And you go, really? 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 Are you sure it wasn't just a really hairy gentleman? Maybe somebody wearing a fur coat. I said, no, it was a Sasquatch, I promise. I mean, that's a pretty big claim, right? That's an extraordinary claim. So I would need to provide extraordinary evidence, like the body. Or I'd be like, no, sample all this blood that's all over me. Like, see, do some DNA scans. That ain't good. It's not something that's here that we know about. Now, if in contrast, I came in looking the exact same way, my truck looks the exact same way, then I say, holy crap, I ran over a deer on the way in. You're probably just going to go, oh, that sucks. But you're not going to call me a liar because we know that deers exist. They're real, right? We've all seen them. How many of you guys have hit one before? Really low numbers. You guys need to get out there more. Just kidding. Please don't try any of the deers because of this thing. I would feel awful. When you make these extraordinary claims, you have to have some sort of extraordinary evidence to back that up. And this simply, of course, means that if a claim is going to be considered meaningful in any sort of scientific sense, it has to be capable of being disproven. I have to be able to falsify that claim. So, just saying something and you can't collect data on it, that doesn't prove or disprove it. It doesn't get you anywhere. You can talk all you want, right? But where's my evidence? Where's my data? So I tell all of you, right? All right, we're taking a road trip. We're going to go back down to Edmond, where I'm from, because I have something fantastic in my garage. So load up in my Sasquatch-covered truck. We're all going to go down there. And you're all, for some reason, decide that that's a good idea. And I apparently have a very large truck. So everyone hops in, we throw Sasquatch blood out, and we go to my garage. And I say, I want to show you something. Because I have this wonderful dragon in my garage, right? And at this point you're thinking, well, okay, well we can go down there and then we can just help him along to the psychiatric institute if we need to. And I say, look, there's a dragon in my garage. And I open up my garage, right? And I say, ta-da! And I point, and everyone sees the dragon, right? Oh, no, you can't see it because it's invisible. I said, sorry, I should have warned you ahead of time, right? You say, okay, well, being scientific skeptics, I'd like some evidence that it's there. How about we throw some flour in there, right? And that we'll see the outline of it. And I said, oh, I'm so sorry. It's intangible as well. Oh, crap. Well, I've got some of these night vision goggles that look at heat signatures. Dragons breathe fire, right? Maybe I'll put those on and we can see the heat signature of the dragon. I said, oh, sorry, it's an ice dragon. It won't make it roar. Dragons can make noise, right? Ah, sorry. It just talks to me telepathically. Maybe it might talk to you sometime, but I can't make it. And every test that you throw out to look for physical evidence of this dragon in my garage, they shoot down. Here's why we can't do it. Here's why we can't do it. Here's why we can't do it. And so after 5-10 minutes of this, most of you would have to conclude one of two things. Either I'm telling the truth and I have special magical powers that allow me to see and perceive this dragon in my garage, or I'm making the whole thing up. And maybe you still need to help me to the psychiatric hospital, right? Because you can't falsify that. If you can't falsify a claim, it's meaningless from a scientific point of view. And then we have the principle of parsimony, also known as Occam's razor. And over the years, the last 600 years or so, this has come to mean, although it didn't originally mean, I don't get into the history. Basically, it means that the simplest explanation of the data, the events, is the best as long as it has the fewest assumptions. Right? So, small numbers of assumptions with an explanation are much more powerful than something that's overly complicated. So, as an example, who knows what this is? Crop circles, excellent, excellent. So what's that looks like in my backyard? Right? I'm terrible at mowing. Yeah, it's crop circles. It's crop circles. Crop circles have been held up for the last 30 plus years as evidence of aliens coming to Earth. And for some reason, I mean, I know when I travel, what I like to do is go and mess up their crops. Go down to Honduras and just tramping around. You know? No, it's fun. This is enjoyable. But for some reason, this is held up as fantastic evidence. Oh, look at the geometric patterns. Look at the wondrousness of this. There are hidden messages within it. Or we could look for a more parsimonious explanation, right? Because explanation one would be an alien civilization who's obviously extremely advanced technologically, has traveled light years to come here, probe our anuses, and mess up our wheat. Lots of assumptions behind that. Interstellar travel, alien intelligence, that for some reason they have the social skills of a 13-year-old, this is all that they know how to do, and they get to a new planet, it's like, let's screw some stuff up. Or you can make a more parsimonious explanation, which was that all of these are created by humans using very simple tools and devices. And those tools are boards and ropes. And it turns out you can replicate these very, very easily. Now, the farmers tend to get very angry, so I don't recommend you do this. But you can. You can replicate these quite easily just using a pin with a rope around it, and then you just walk around in circles. And it turns out that when these first showed up in the late 1970s in England, that's exactly what was happening. And we know this because in the early 90s, the two people who started it came forward. These two old English farmers were just like, hey, crop circles? That was us. What are you talking about? That was you. We started that. It was a joke. We were at the pub one night. We just, got a little too much to drink. We decided to play a trick on our buddy. And then we just kept going. It's awesome. Why are you coming forward now? We're old. We're tired. We just can't keep this up anymore. And it turns out that's how crop circles started. And we know that, for example, farmers exist. We know that they drink in England. We know that they drink a lot in England. And we know that, things like people like to play jokes on other people. So there's a lot fewer assumptions in that explanation of this phenomenon. Replicability is another one of our principles of critical thinking. And this is that findings must be duplicated. So you can't just find something once and then assume that it's true. And ideally what we have is that findings must be duplicated by researchers that are not associated with the original projects. Cold fusion is a fantastic example of this. Because if no one else can find out what you find, then we have to start casting some suspicions on whether you're actually finding what you're finding, or you're making it up. So let's say that I think transcendental meditation, TM, is the greatest thing since sliced bread. And I think that by having everyone in the world meditate, we can reduce crime and make the world a better place. But you don't even have to get everybody on board. If you just have people, a large number of people converge on a city and do meditation, then that city's crime rates will drop. Well, that's a nice hypothesis and all. But it turns out it's a pretty crappy hypothesis. Even though results of a study that were conducted to examine this in the early 90s were actually published in a journal. And what had happened was a bunch of TMers descended upon Washington, D.C. in the summer of 91, I believe, maybe 92, and did all sorts of meditating. And then they published a journal article showing that, crimes went down. They looked at the general crime rate, and they just reported on that, which looks really cool until you look at the full set of data, which shows that actually homicides went way up. Probably because people were pissed off about everybody meditating, right? They're like, hippie, get out of the way, right? No, I'm meditating to make you less angry. You're making me more angry right now. I'm going to kill you because it's DC in the early 90s, and that's just what we do. solve problems. And then subsequent studies that tried to find that same effect failed miserably. Because it wasn't even an effect in the first place, it was a statistical anomaly. And there were more murders, so it really wasn't reducing the crime rates much. So you have to be able to replicate your results, or otherwise they're basically useless. And then we have the principle, excuse me, of ruling out rival hypotheses. This is where if there are two ways of explaining a certain event or a certain set of data, you have to actually consider them. You can't just dismiss out of hand the one that you don't like. So, for example, let's say that you come down with some sort of an illness and you go to your local homeopath, because they have those everywhere, right? They're called Walgreens, which have large amounts of these. And you go, oh, I'm going to take some homeopathic medicine to make me feel better. Oh, nom, 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 right? You take like a whole bottle of it. And then lo and behold, you get better, right? Your headache goes away. Your joint pain reduces. Your cold goes away. And so you say, oh, yeah, the homeopathic medicine fixed me right up. I'm going to use it again next time. Well, there's an alternative explanation there, right? And that alternative explanation is that our bodies, it turns out, have evolved to be wondrously self-healing. And that probably regardless of whether or not you had taken any medication, your headache would have went away. Your joint pain would have decreased. Your cold virus would have run its course. But you're not considering both possible alternatives. Most people just stick with the one that they want. That's part of the confirmation bias. So you have to be able to look at alternative hypotheses to explain your data, explain your information. And then we have the correlation is not causation. And I'm sure this was all drilled into you during your education, right? But still, people fall for this quite frequently. And they fall for it because of what we call the third variable problem. So if A and B are correlated, if they're related in some fashion, it turns out there are actually three possible explanations for this. One would be that A causes B. Here's a good example. Murder and the amount of ice cream sold are very strongly positively correlated. As one goes up, the other goes up. I'm not making this up either. This is real. Okay? So one potential explanation for that correlation would be, well, eating ice cream causes you to want to murder. Or perhaps murdering makes you really hungry for ice cream. I mean, I always know after a good murder, I'd die if I didn't get to Brahms, right? A little shake, maybe a sundae. No, I don't actually murder. So. And of course, the problem with this is that there could be a third variable that's causing both murder and ice cream sales. What is that going to be? Can you guess? Heat, right. Temperature. It turns out the hotter it is, the higher our murder rates. And the hotter it is, the larger amount of ice cream that's sold. So those two things have nothing to actually do with each other. They're caused by a third variable. I thought I would also talk about another example of this, just to sort of drive it home, and because it's a good Kansas example. The average global temperature versus the number of pirates in the world. And it turns out that if you plot the estimated number of pirates in the world over the last 200 years, and you compare that to our average global temperature, there's a very strong negative correlation, meaning as the number of pirates decreased, our average global temperature actually increased. That's a problem, isn't it? So for all of you driving hybrids and turning off your air conditioner and trying to save on energy, you're going about it all wrong, right? You need to be doing much pirating. Right? We only got like 17 out there. We need a lot more pirates than that if we're going to actually offset this whole global warming thing. And I know Kansas doesn't have a whole lot of inland seas or anything, but I think maybe some road pirating would be fine, Mad Max style, to try and decrease the temperature. And this is, you know, these are estimates, obviously, but this is pretty accurate. And the problem, of course, is not that, you know, either it got hotter, so pirates were like, oh, screw this, it's too hot to do any pirating. And it's not as if the lack of pirates that caused global warming somehow. It's a third variable, right? There's a third variable that caused both of these. Anybody want to take a guess? The Industrial Revolution, right? It's a lot harder to pirate if your ships are traveling very fast and are made of metal. Unless they're like those big cruise ships and you're going by Somalia for some ridiculous reason. And then it turns out you can board them fairly easily. So you can't always rely on these correlations to say that something causes one another. So great. What about in real life? I mean, how many times is someone going to come to you and say, hey, I swear the number of pirates is related to global warming? Hopefully not very often. It could happen, I suppose, but hopefully not very often. Well, these critical thinking principles, it turns out, they could really, why does that keep going? Really be used in all aspects of life. So I'm not just talking about paranormal, the supernatural, or religious claims. I'm talking about every aspect of your life. What car you're going to buy, what food you eat, where you're going to live. So that you should be exploring and experimenting with new ideas, but doing so from this critical thinking mindset. You know, this is the keep your mind open, right? But not so open that your brain falls out. Because sometimes it turns out you can rely on others to give you evidence, and sometimes you can't. Now, in my field, clinical psychology, there are a couple of actually good things that you can use where people have reviewed evidence. And people say, oh, well, here's what works or who works. One of these is from Consumer Reports. This is called Best Buy Drugs. This is a wonderful resource if you're taking any sort of psychotropic or non-psychotropic medication to find out what's been shown to be most effective. The Cochrane reports put out by the Cochrane Group are another fantastic example of someone who's actually reviewed the scientific literature for you so that you don't have to go review it all yourself, because it turns out that's kind of hard, especially if you're not trained in that scientific field. Another one of these is something that I'm involved with. That's the Secular Therapist Project. This is a database of psychologists, counselors, all kinds of therapists that have been vetted and shown to be using evidence-based practice and have secular backgrounds. So you're not just picking somebody at random if you're having mental health difficulties out of the phone book. Then you walk in and they want to pray with you. Which it turns out not a lot of empirical evidence to support that. For much of anything, but particularly for mental health. So sometimes you can rely on other people, but those people have to be using these critical thinking skills and these methods, or otherwise you might as well just throw a dart at the board. So that's what I've got. If you've got questions right now, I'm happy to take them for our own time. Otherwise, find me around here today. Hook up with me on Facebook and Twitter and YouTube, and Skeptic Gaming Network. And thank you very much.
Does anybody have any questions for Caleb?
Where did you get that fine tie?
Where did I get that fine tie? I got it from evolvefish.com, which is a wonderful online store. It's right out of Colorado. Yes, evolvefish.com. They have all sorts of wonderful flying spaghetti monster related paraphernalia, as well as other free thinker and atheist stuff.
heuristic stuff I found very interesting. That when you talked about our ability to accurately judge trustworthiness,
Yeah.
I'm just curious if you've ever done any research opposite that. Like, well, I've come across some things that say we're remarkably inept at judging risk, like the opposite of our ability to
Yes.
judge trustworthiness. Have you ever looked into that?
We're terrible at judging risk. That's why most of us should in no way, shape, or form play the stock market. Because what we tend to do is we'll choose the stock market as an example, which is risky. Right? I'm putting money in. And then your stocks go up. What we tend to do is we think that they're going to keep going up. So we think we're going to get more out of it. But then they start to go down. And then we want to hold on to that. And so we don't sell them when we should. Instead, we keep them much too long. And that's because what we do is we're very risk averse. So we don't play probability very well at all. We're not natural statisticians. And so with something like that, what we do instead of actually looking at, here's the data that shows when I should save or when I should get out. Instead of relying on that, we rely on these intuitions, these feelings. I think it's going to keep going up. And we tend to, compared to computer models, do very poorly and not actually do very well when we're doing things like that. So yeah, we are pretty terrible at judging risk, and a lot of it comes down to our natural inability to accurately judge probabilities. Some forms of math we're fantastic at, naturally. Calculus, for example. Like I throw you a ball, and you catch it. And it turns out you're using all sorts of calculus methodology to catch it, like traveling rates through the air, how do I move? But the probabilities, we're terrible at judging those.
I think that especially risk is really applicable to your talk. And a good example that you can maybe incorporate is a lot of people assume the likelihood of dying from a shark attack is much greater than dying from airplane parts falling from the sky.
Right.
That's actually very not true.
Right.
You're much more likely to die from airplane parts falling from the sky.
Well, as a clinical psychologist, one of my primary areas is fears. So I look at anxiety, and I treat people who have things like fears of snakes, and spiders, and heights, and so on and so forth. What's always great is I've got a python in my office at work that I keep there that I work with. His name is Monty, by the way. Because I'm awesome. And people will come in and they'll just be terrified of it, right? But it turns out the most deadly animal in North America is what? Any guesses? Well, aside from humans, I'm sorry. Yes, the most deadly non-human animal. Someone said cows. No. Deers. Deers cause more property damage and deaths each year than any other animal in the Americas. And not because they're like breaking into your house, right? Goring you in your bed. It's because they jump out in front of your vehicles. But no one comes into me and is like, I can't watch Bambi with my kids. And it's really bothering me. But people will come in and say, I can't go camping because I'm afraid of bugs and things like that. Which is it's just another great example of this disproportionate risk belief. Yeah.
My question is about confirmation bias, and I think most of us think we use skeptical thinking, critical thinking, and even arrive at agnosticism rate. But then we proceed to read everything that confirms that belief. So,
Yes.
do I have to go back, or anybody have to go back and read that boring religious crap to prove that, my belief is correct?
You feel like you need to. Is that
No,
right?
the question is the confirmation bias.
Do
Am
I?
I just reinforcing what I believe?
Yes.
Since I've done all of that critical thinking to arrive where I'm at.
Yes. And this is, again, all of these biases are things that happen in all people. And so if you're a non-theist, then you're viewing the world through these non-theistically colored glasses. If you're a theist, you're viewing them through these Jesus-colored glasses, right? Which would be kind of hard to see through unless you're in the palm. Sorry. It's too soon. I'm sorry. So if you're a non-theist, and then you pop open see how ridiculous this is? I know this isn't actual. I know this isn't real. I know that there wasn't an exodus from Egypt because there's no archaeological evidence to support it. But you may ignore other things, or if you're, a Jesus mythicist versus a historical Jesus, you may only pay attention to and read those books that support the Jesus as myth story and ignore the Jesus as historical figure story stuff. So we do this all the time. It doesn't matter what our belief system is. And that's something that I think is crucial if you're going to become an excellent critical thinker, is that you have to be able to entertain and open your mind up to those alternatives. Aliens is another good example in terms of sort of the pseudoscience, right? I'm very open to the idea that there is life on other planets. I think it's probably statistically, very likely. But does that mean that it's buzzing us and probing anuses and mutilating cows and that's the entire purpose of them? Probably not, right? So you have to be open to the evidence being presented to you to disconfirm your beliefs. But you have to, at the same time, rely on scientific methodology to actually do that. So, great question.
Well, in this context, I'd just like to point out that at some point, most of us are adequately convinced of the truth of the proposition, that we don't have to continually revisit the opposition. Once we're convinced that we have a heliocentric solar system, we don't have to keep rereading flat Earth tracks, but we're entitled to study celestial mechanics.
And that's something that's actually been shown to be right? So that's something that can be disproven as the Earth-centric or the geocentric solar system. Other things that can't be disproven. I can't disprove that there's no life outside of the Earth, for example. Right? That's when you have to keep this open mind. Stuff like that, obviously. I don't have to go to the Flat Earth Society and check out their website every other day to see if there's some new exciting research. Because there's not. And so when you have things like that are established to such a degree that they're facts, right? Evolutionary theory is another example of this. At this point, we have 150 years worth of converging data from numerous fields that show that things evolve, and it's what happens. So you don't have to keep responding to, let's go check out the ideas. But for these propositions that you don't have that sort of solitude or certainty about, you should be keeping an open mind. But that's a good example of something where you don't have to.
Caleb, I'm going to ask you a question about this binding. What role does fear, play a role in it, and what role does it play? Here's why. Growing up in religious tradition in the church, we were taught, and I was taught, that you don't go outside that realm because, and the fear is there, that if you do, it's going to destroy your faith.
Yes.
So the bias exists, but the fear support, is that a good way of thinking?
There's excellent evidence that shows that the higher the emotionality associated with a belief, the more that you will stick to that confirmation bias. So that means the more that a belief upsets you, the more that it makes you happy, the more that it makes you afraid, the more emotional you are about a particular belief, the stronger you hold to it. And that's, I think the fear aspect of religion is a good example of that, particularly with the fundamentalist religions.
All right, so I think that's all the time we've got for questions, but if you guys have more questions, like you said, feel free to find them in the lobby. Thanks again.